is among the fastest growing fintech markets in the world. The Indian fintech industry's market size was valued at $31 billion in 2021, and it's estimated to touch about $150 billion in value by 2025. Technology adoption at banks has become a necessity. It has also opened up a world of possibilities. What do customers expect from modern day banking, and what digital adoption can solve for banks? Is engagement banking the answer, and what does it look like? We're talking about building a bank that customers love. My guests today are Mr. Kiran Gadhari, Senior Vice President, Digital Banking at Axis Bank, Mr. Mahesh Ramamurthy, the CIO of Yes Bank, Mr. Vivek Belgavi, the partner at PwC, and Mr. Riddhi Datta, Regional Head for ASEAN and South Asia at Backbase. Guys, thank you so much for taking time out and chatting with us. Customer expectations are being shaped by the environment we have evolved into. Connected devices, which offer information at the click of a button, have shaped the way people respond. Anything digital is everything instant. Some call it the age of instant gratification. In the age where everything from advice to money is available at the click of a button, let us start with articulating the trends we see in what customers today expect from a bank. Kiran, I'd like to start with you. Talk to us about the big trends that are emerging right now.
The trends which we had seen in last couple of years, basically from post-COVID and pre-COVID era, customers today prefer to do things digitally. They don't want to visit the branches for anything and everything. Same customers who were earlier happy to visit a branch, happy to talk to the sales guys face to face, their expectations has grown immensely, where they expect that their bank should offer all these services digitally to them. Those are from a customer expectation point of view. Obviously, banks are doing certain things using technologies like artificial intelligence, real-time decision making, to offer these services to customers, where customers' experience can be much better compared to what it used to be a few years back. So yes, banks are trying their best to match the customer expectation to serve them digitally in all the aspects of the banking.
What is it that you're picking up from your customers? What is it that today's customers want when they go to a bank and want to even, perform day-to-day activities?
If you look at a banking or financial aspect of the whole thing, any customer wants an experience where there is ease of use first. Ease of use in the sense that not everyone uses all the functionalities that are there, but it's always the top 10 that is always probably the max used. And they would like to have an ease of access and use. That's one. Two, a customer really looks for the safety and the security of the transaction. That is very key for them. So whatever they transact, they are wanting to understand that whatever we perform as a transaction, it happens properly and it is 100% secure, and they get confirmation of the transaction that is there. And in case something is wrong, the bank is immediately responding to the fact that there is a failed transaction, or they're coming back to confirm with the customer, hey, listen, there is something which has gone wrong. So I think whether it is a retail customer or corporate customer, they expect the bank to understand what they are trying to do and to help them respond to it in case there is a issue that is coming through. The third thing is, more importantly, I think it's the ability for them to start the emerging trend that is happening is to go beyond what banking is about, which means that can we start to look at options beyond financials, beyond where they would like to look at certain purchases. They would like to look at certain other areas, for example, the tax related areas. So I think that's where the evolution is happening, to say that, can I use one entry point, one single app to be able to do my entire lifestyle? So that's the movement that you're starting to see from an expectation perspective. So in my mind, I think there are three areas. One is to be able to ease of access, which essentially learns from the customer's usage on and off, and hence tries to rebalance the entire ability to create a quick access. The second part is essentially looking at security, in terms of making sure whatever they transact is indeed completed. If not, there is an immediate form of confirmation that it has not happened, and then the customers can absolutely secure that the money is with them, money is in their account, is not flown out. And if it has, for whatever it's not completed, there is assurance from the bank that they're tracing it. And the third part is, how do I now extend the capabilities to manage their overall lifestyle, and which are the options that one can subscribe to be able to get there.
Now, evolution in technology is a boon which brings technology legacy issues with it. How is new age technology addressing that challenge?
Now, I think Mahesh spoke about three very key things. One is on the simple and intuitive nature of these banking applications. Second is around security, and third, I think the most important point which I believe in is making it more contextual in terms of what is the customer trying to do, and as a bank, as a financial institution, can you really offer the customer what they are looking for, not something very generic there. And that's where I think the systems, the technology, or the underlying applications that the bank is using becomes very important. Now, you asked about legacy. The question that I would like to sort of ask back to this entire forum out here, and even to the audience, is that when we are talking about legacy, is it just about technology, or is it legacy in terms of the business processes, or is it legacy in terms of a new legacy that banks are creating in the name of launch applications? And I'll give you a couple of examples there. Legacy technology is probably easy to address. Some banks are using old backend systems. You can modernize them, you can move them to new age systems. That's a given. That's easy to do. What I'm trying to address here is that, and this is something I've seen working with a lot of banks, not just in India but even outside, is that banks are talking about creating so many different customer touch points, customer applications for different types of customers, retail, corporate, as well as different stages of the customer life cycle, starting from how you're onboarding customers, how you're servicing them, and how you're really helping them doing more cross-sell, upsell, and go for more products. Now, more often than not, banks are looking at creating these point solutions. And the more point solutions you end up creating, the more silos and the more legacy, once again, you end up creating without really being aware of it, right? And that is where I think what Mahesh was talking about, that more and more the trend is that, hey, can I capture the entire life cycle of the customer on one single offering, on one single channel, on one single application, so that customers don't really need to go for one particular application for their loan applications, one particular app for their payments, and something else for their e-wallet. And that is a trend that we are seeing slowly. A lot of banks are moving towards to, but then currently that system is not there yet. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not about let's take an instance. It's not about offering a personal loan to a customer over their mobile channel, or about offering an omni-channel experience across web and mobile. I think that's a thing of the past. It's more about just offering a contextual engagement to the customer, irrespective of channel. It does not matter whether it's on the mobile app, whether it's on the contact center, even branch for that matter. I look at branch as a digital channel. I don't think branch is not a digital channel. So the channel is not very important. The touch point is not very important. What is important is, can you work with your internal processes, with your internal silos, with your architecture, with your technology, to offer a contextual engagement to the customer across their entire life cycle? And that ranges across different types of customers, that ranges across different types of products, as well as different types of services, right? So that's how I would like to look at legacy, not really from a technology perspective, but more from internal processes and silo perspective.
How easy or difficult has it been to work with legacy systems when crafting a modern day user experience?
The challenge is not really working. The challenge is not really working with legacy systems. Legacy systems has its own share of challenges, as I'm pretty sure Mahesh would be aware of, leading the technology function of such a large bank. But that's not where the real challenge lies, according to me. The real challenge, as I was talking about earlier, is more about, what sort of business processes are you following? And again, I'll just give you a couple of examples here. I like talking about real life instances. Mahesh spoke about, the top 10 transactions. I think those are things that banks really need to look at. Quite often we have seen banks come to the table and start talking about, hey, I want 30, 40, 50, 60 different types of functionalities on my banking applications. The question that we like to ask is, do you really need them? Do you really think your customers are going to use all of that on day one, on day two, on day three? Why don't you just look at, apply the 80-20 principle? Why don't you just look at those 20% transactions which contribute to 80% of your transaction volumes? and really look at how you as a bank can make that experience of those 20% transactions world class, best in class. Don't focus on everything under the sun, because your customers are not looking at everything under the sun. They're looking at specific needs. They have, when they are approaching a financial institution, when they are approaching a bank, it's for a specific help. You know, they're looking at how do I save my money, how do I invest my money, how do I grow my money, or probably, you know, important lifestyle moments like I need to buy a house, I need to buy a car, can you fund me? So the point here is this: again, it's not about so much about the legacy systems, it's about the legacy processes that banks invariably tend to create on top of those systems, modern or legacy. And that's probably the biggest challenge we see when we are working with financial institutions, large and small.
Banks are the original service industry. We all know that service differentiates one bank from the other. The experience at the teller, counter, or service desk for a long time now has made many people decide if they want to increase their balance in that bank account. Now, digital advantage gives us the opportunity to reimagine what's possible. So let's talk about the possibilities bankers and tech companies are making. I'd like to get in your view as well, Vivek, on this trend. Talk to us a little bit more about how an experience can enhance your customer base, your loyalty, your reach, and so on.
Probably let me start by giving a example which would be 20, 30 years old. This would be a experience given at a traditional branch in a fairly remote area, catchment area, where probably there are 1,000, 2,000 odd customers who visit the branch. There's a level of intimacy which the branch managers and the staff developed with the customers. Not just, and that intimacy also translated into banking knowledge. So they were aware of the needs and the context of the customers and were able to position it better. And that led to a fair bit of loyalty. So the previous generation, if you take a look at it, everyone stuck around with their banks for much longer, did much deeper businesses. Probably that for me is a benchmark of how do we translate that into the digital world. The first wave, a lot of digital experiences got created in terms of inside out, showing to the customer what we have. Now, if you put hand on the heart, have or many of us developed that level of intimacy with our banking experiences? The answer would probably be no. And I would beg to differ that this kind of experience is not possible, because we have seen it happen in the physical world. Players would be able to replicate that, would be able to create that loyalty, would go a long way. Now, what is needed? So probably in my mind, three things. The first thing is focus. You will not be able to create an experience for everyone. You need to pick up your segments, or you want to pick up your journeys. There could be different ways you can get started, but focus is very critical. Because through focus, you will get to understand the needs. You'll be able to walk into your customer's shoes, empathize with what they need at the point of transaction, and give them that moment of joy. So focus, in my view, is the first one. Second one is, as we start defining these experiences, we have to do outside in. I have been part of many such conversations where we start by saying that, okay, what's the product journey, right? So, but it's good to know that, and we know that we're in a regulated business. There would be a fair bit of checks and balances we have to build through the journey. But for a second, let's keep it by the side. Let's be aware of it, keep it by the side, and start spending a lot of time with consumers. We have advocated the practice of just active listening. So if you want to shadow someone over a period of time, you can do digital shadowing, physical shadowing, and you really empathize with what challenges or what are the moments of joy the customers are looking for. Capture those, work backwards, build those journeys. Lastly, wherever possible, do de novo. Almost the first or second version of a lot of digital front end that we saw was kind of picking up the internet banking version, simplifying it and putting on a mobile phone. That didn't go far. So if possible, start de novo. Whatever knowledge that we have on functionality, features, requirements, keep it in your back pocket. Design journeys outside in, empathize with your customers, start afresh, and probably, as Riddhi was saying, simplify. We may not want to show all that you have to do. And then keep in mind that, as Kiran started off, that every bank wants to be a bank in a mobile. But on the mobile also resides many other applications. There is a WhatsApp or a YouTube or so on and so forth. So the consumer is now expecting similarish experiences, and simplification would be the name of the game.
Okay, so one thing is pretty much clear by now, that banks need to reimagine the customer experience in order to stay ahead of the competition. Now, Kiran, What can Indian banks do, according to you, to rise up to this challenge?
Customer is also today expecting that a bank should know who he is or who she is, what type of transactions he or she has done, and basis that, rather than giving a generic offers or generic communication, customers are today expecting that they should get a personalized experience from the digital channels or from the banks. Uh, like before, someone was explaining that in a physical world, RM or tailor or branch manager will know the customer who is walking into a branch. He will address the customer accordingly. I think that is what exactly banks are trying to do in a digital world also. So when customers' footprints are entering into a digital world, whether it is mobile banking app, internet banking, or even phone banking, IVR, I think this is what today customers are expecting, that when I call a call center, uh, my bank should recognize me who I am. Obviously, through voice recognition or through some authentication. Once that authentication is done, uh, the experience or the questions the phone banking officer or the virtual agent will ask me should make me feel, yes, I am a esteemed customer of the bank. They know who I am, since long I am banking with them, what transactions I had done, and obviously basis my transaction history or basics the product holding, a bank should offer me a relevant products rather than having a generic product into my offer list. So yes, banks do understand that this is the journey which they have started few years back. This is not they aspire to. They already know this is what is important. Maybe it will take few more years, but eventually banks want to land to this destination where they will know their customers. Uh, when I say know their customers, not from the KYC point of view, they know each and every customers through their transaction history, their patterns, what they can offer to the customers, and eventually it will land into a hyper personalized experience for the customers.
Mahesh, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I think the point that is well made by the colleague out here is the fact that the hyper personalization needs to be focused in terms of what is relevant to the customer and the segment of the customer. And that's most important. For example, someone who's a senior citizen, I think does not need everything. They just need 3 or 4, which is very critical for them. Whereas someone in the younger millennials need a slightly different approach. And in fact, what's more important of all of these is to make sure that the control of the environment, control of what they transact is essentially available with the end user, with the customer, rather than we just trying to make a one size fits all. That won't work. I think that's where we have to calibrate, I would say, the personalization views, rather than just making it as a common app across. I think those days are possibly a bit past. So there is always going to be the dichotomy of thoughts in these, and that's where I would probably want to place a viewpoint here.
So the new interface of your internet banking or the new feature in the app is all very exciting. But new interface and new arrangements expect both bank employees and customers to reorient themselves. What's your experience, Riddhi? Have you ever rolled a brand new feature in the digital bank, and how have you helped internal and external stakeholders to take it in?
Very, very good question there, Karunya, because Kiran was mentioning right at the beginning, right, that the experience that we want to give as a bank is something what we get from e-commerce platforms, or we get from some of the modern, B2B, engines, like we talk about Netflix and Amazon and Shopify all the times. Now, what is very interesting when you look at all these and more, if you look at Uber, if you look at all these applications, the common theme that we have realized is them and then some of the more modern digital banks across the globe. The common theme is that they have been using, again, it's a very loosely defined term, they have been using platforms very effectively. Now, what is a platform out here? A platform is one single orchestration layer which brings all stakeholders, in this case of a financial institution or a bank, onto the same single layer. So when I'm saying stakeholders, it's not just the customers. We have been talking about customers and their experience and their context for a while. but it is also internal stakeholders. And it does not end there. There is also the entire ecosystem, the external stakeholders. Mahesh was talking about, I think, tax payments going beyond normal financial stuff. So you might need to work with, let's talk about large corporates. When they are issuing letters of credit, they need to also integrate with logistics providers. So that's the external ecosystem. Now, can a bank ensure that all its stakeholders out here, as it's the customers, the internal employees, as well as the external stakeholders, can orchestrate out of one single platform? Now, what is the advantage of doing that? The advantage is that you get real-time transparency, like what we see on Uber, like what we see on a Zomato. We know where our food is, has the restaurant prepared it, has the driver reached, how far is the driver from my home. Again, all of that because all the stakeholders, the restaurants, the drivers, the customer are operating out of one single platform. So that is the main DNA of platforms, engagement platforms like Backbase that I represent today, where it's not just about the customer, it's about any and every stakeholder that a bank or a financial institution is involved with. And the real next gen experience that we have been talking about for the last 15-20 minutes is really going to happen when you bring all the stakeholders on one single platform. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, not let them work on siloed applications or siloed infrastructure where one stakeholder does not have a view of what the other is doing in the bank. So that's what our point of view is, Karunya, and that's where we try to advocate and talk to our customers and prospects across the globe, that try and see if you could really orchestrate all types of stakeholder engagement from one single horizontal layer rather than doing it in silos.
What are the big challenges of tech adoption for banks as well as for customers? Anything that comes to your mind?
From a customer perspective, I don't think, again, going back to some of the points that Mahesh and Vivek were saying, if it's a customer who is a senior citizen, who is probably not very, not very somebody who's, used to using digital devices, there could be, but I think that's more and more being sorted out with more simple, intuitive applications. I think that's the name of the game, that make your banking applications very simple, very intuitive, minimum clicks rather than make it too jazzy. I think jazzy applications are also a pass for me. So that's more on the customer adoption. But on the banking side, in terms of tech adoption, again, I might be a little bit repetitive here, but the main challenge that we foresee is that when we talk to a lot of banks, a lot of a lot of big banks in that case, there is this notion that these things are very simple to build on our own. And again, I might be going a little bit against what the general perception of the room here today is, but that is probably the biggest challenge that I foresee that banks are getting into, which they might not be realizing today, where they feel that let's build these things ground up. Probably easier to control and maintain on day one, but as you go through the entire life cycle of that application over year 3, over year 5, over year 7, you'll see that maintaining that with your resources, with the availability of people, continuously upgrading the technology as well as upgrading the skill sets of people becomes a big hassle. So I think that from a banking perspective, that's the biggest challenge that we see when it comes to technology, where banks really tend to do everything on their own. We as platform providers are not advocating that banks don't build. In fact, banks love to build. Banks love to have that flexibility. And we also say, hey, have that flexibility. But going back to that same point that I was saying earlier, think about the 80-20 principle. There would be 80% features, functionalities, transactions where a bank A cannot really differentiate from a bank B. It's pretty standard, in terms of how you are sending money to somebody else or how you're paying bills. You really cannot differentiate yourself there. So on those journeys, on those sort of experiences, don't try to reinvent the wheel. But there is that 20% where a bank A is really going to differentiate from bank B in terms of, let's say, how you're bringing in the ecosystem, how you're bringing in the rest of your suppliers. Focus on those journeys, build those journeys on top of platforms, on top of accelerators, rather than trying to do everything custom. I think that's the biggest tech challenge that I see when it comes to banks. From a customer perspective, I don't really see, I think, because as a population, we are sort of becoming younger day and day. So that's really not a challenge. From the bank's perspective, that's a challenge that I foresee.
Banks have organized the basis of the operations around the customer and their needs. Traditionally, we've led terms like retail banking, corporate banking, wealth management, trade associations, trade accounts rather, which are associated with banking operations. Let's take some examples of how engagement banking or automated banking affect the different customer segments that a bank serves. Vivek, I'd like your inputs on this.
Sure, Karanya. I think good question, because each one of those segments has their own needs and there are some overlaps. But let's start with retail. Now, retail at one level would expect a lot more frequency of transaction. But again, you have to double click to say the customer experience is not defined by the product segment, but also by demographics. So, millennial retail customer versus a senior citizen that Mahesh was talking about earlier, like both could have slightly different needs, but more commonly, this is where you would see a lot more frequency, and especially think about payments. You would expect someone to do retail payments like UPI and others a lot more frequently than others, or cards you would want to use. So a lot of experiences driven by payments related products, as well as short term credit, investments. Many of those themes are critical. Now, when you get to corporate, there again, there is a whole spectrum out there. You could start with SME, which many of the SMEs from sole prop perspective could behave almost like retail, but then there could be completely large corporates spread in many cases across countries. Different offices would again require a very different B2B kind of an experience in their realm. Again, I might comment that a lot of innovation, I believe, has happened really slightly more on the retail side than on corporate, and there's a lot more opportunity there now to up the experience game. Having said that, in corporates, a theme which Riddhi picked up earlier, which was around platforms and ecosystems, and that's going to become the key. So we have been working with a few banks in getting deep into certain ecosystems like education, agri, healthcare, and others. There, the goal is to understand that the client you're servicing, the B2B customer, is also embedded in the whole value chain, and you would provide better and more intuitive and relevant banking experience if you start giving functionality or giving access to functionality, a lot of them could be non-financial, which they would think is important. So compliance, tax is one category, bookkeeping is the other category we're talking about. Access to markets in terms of access to, let's say, either on the procurement side or on the vendor side. Access to market is the other need that we see evolving. So yeah, so that just to give a brief flavor, retail, lot more real time, lot more lifestyle driven. Again, corporate side, lot more ecosystem driven, if I have to simplify nuances there. But I do think demographics would play a lot more role than a product as we design experiences.
Tech has the power to bring the entire customer base into one big data set. We now dig into that big database every time a query comes to the system. Both internal and external customers, through appropriate security clarification, eventually dive into a common database to get relevant information. As we move forward, do we expect banks to reorient their operations away from tradition? Is it likely that going forward, banking ops will not align to traditional customer classification of retail, and in different other segments? What's your sense on that, Mahesh?
I think it's a very evolving question, the way I would put it, because that's where most of the banks are really looking to collapse the differentiation by virtue of moving towards a kind of end-to-end digitization capability, and B, look at it from a customer perspective and customer journey perspective. So as you start to collapse some of the processes, you will start to see some of the changes in the operational side of the story. Right now, what is happening is, the entire ecosystem, the banking processes are revolved around customer journeys by the various verticals. I think those will start to disappear, especially as we go front end with saying that journey is unified at a customer level, and he or she decides as to what they need to go through. So to me, the defining moment would be a customer who's probably an individual customer, the customer who's now being, like Vivek had mentioned, a small, medium customer who's also probably having a current account relationship and not over and above a savings account relationship. How do those journeys collapse into a probably end-to-end automated flow? And then very little manual intervention, but at the same time, there are risk parameters just manage it. I think that's going to be very, very critical. It's a bit of a, uh, I would say, hyper automation kind of a situation that will start to emerge here. So to me, I think there's still some time away for a bank to look at it. But yes, there are some smaller footsteps that you can start to take here, and which is predominantly starting between those businesses which are adjacent to each other, like a retail versus a small income business, and then figure out as to how can you start to integrate the journeys. So yes, it is there, but it'll take some time is what I would look at. And that's where banks need to overlay their journeys with either the simplistic automation side of the story, the RPA side of the story, and more importantly, the digitization from the front end. And that's going to help a lot as we move forward.
Okay, since we have so many of y'all who are industry watchers, industry participants, I'd like to know from each of you what the future of banking looks like. I'll start with you, Kiran.
Future is hyper-personalized, bank on the mobile, on the go, similar like customer can do any other service. Customer will expect, or customer will get the experience where on the go, anywhere, he will be able to do the banking services.
What about you, Riddhi?
Probably slight extension to what Kiran just mentioned. He mentioned bank in a mobile. That's what the last term that he mentioned. I would, one of a very senior banker once told me, don't tell me terms like digital first and all of it. Probably talk about terms like digital enabled. And that's what I believe, that the future of banking would also be digital enabled. We have, banks like Axis Bank and Yes Bank on the panel. And if you really look at their physical infrastructure, the branches, I'm pretty sure they are not going to write them off, right? So for me, the future of banking would be, obviously it goes without saying customer first, but I would like to call it a little bit different. It's more around stakeholder first. And it's not so much about the channel. It's more about the context of the customer, what the customer is trying to do, understand that, and try to either serve the customer or sell more to the customer or help the customer, but purely based on the context of what the customer is trying to do. It should not be something which is, one size fits all. I think Mahesh was referring to it earlier as well. That is definitely not going to be the future of banking. It's going to be more personalized. Different segments, the gig economy, the millennials, they would have their own aspirations, and banks really need to figure out a way, either through one single unified offering or through multiple different segmented offerings. How do they meet those aspirations? I think that is where the future is going to be. And the biggest term for me out there is about the customer context.
Okay, right. Vivek, any trends that you are observing and that you see, growing into something meaningful and something big in the future of banking?
Yeah, probably again it might be a stretch, but I thought if it is a crystal ball gazing, then one might as well take some punts. I do think the trend is also towards bank, as we know, becoming a lot more invisible, whereas brand and service would be visible. What I mean by that is, if I take an example of a UPI, so bank is fairly invisible. A brand could be visible. A brand could be created by an Axis, not necessarily Google will create a brand. An Axis or a Yes can also create a brand. The brand could be visible, but bank could be invisible, and that could be another trend which will start impacting probably not all products and services, but some products and services. I can see that happening in cards. I can see that happening in accounts and payments. I can also see that happening on the neo-banking side and definitely on the retail credit side.
Okay. Any concluding remarks from you as well, Mahesh? Anything you'd like to add?
So I think very good points being called out by my colleagues out here. The one area that I would like to look at is, eventually it's all about connections. And connections would mean in terms of creating those partnerships also, and hence looking at creating an ability for the end user experience to be much more richer, safer, and more importantly, assurance. I think these are probably three areas that one will be the bedrock of how you create those connections. For example, someone who's in the retail would love to see more. Why can't I have a Yes Bank probably connected via the Zomato app, or why can't I get it via the Tata Click Neo app? Same way, you're going to see a fair bit of differentiated views emerging soon, and these are all going to be driven by very slick technologies coming in. So I would probably term it as connected banking, and connected banking extended through partnership banking with those bedrock area pillars that I called out. That's what I would conclude with.
Automation in banking is bringing about happy experiences at the bank, more of them, more often. As Indian banks set new benchmarks of customer satisfaction, technology platforms are helping craft and implement maverick ideas. In the digital year, we stand at the cusp of defining automation. I'd like to thank all our guests for sharing their thoughts and experiences today. It will go a long way in building a bank that customers love. On that note, thank you so much, guys, for joining in, and thanks to all our viewers for tuning in.